Imagine an entrepreneur. Picture someone in your mind that is your image of an entrepreneur. Just take a moment, think of that person. Now, you saw that since I happen to be a professor at Soongyang, which is the oldest all-women's university, I'm curious, how many pictured a woman? Excellent. Okay. So when you think about entrepreneurs, there's myth and reality. Now, forgive me for being U.S. based, but I spent most of my life in the U.S. And we have these stupid stories around a Horatio Alger, which is like Horatio Alger is supposed to be this person who comes from no education and abject poverty, and then through guts and hard work becomes a millionaire and creates something from scratch. Except that was a story. There was no real person. It was actually a bit of propaganda and was never a real person and was just a story. And when you actually look at real entrepreneurs, male versus female, Caucasian, Korean, young or older, college age or not, the story of who actually starts small businesses, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what do they look like demographically, what do they look like psychographically, as someone that, just as context, at LegalZoom, we formed over 2 million small businesses in the U.S. doing their LLCs, E-Corps, et cetera. We're the largest former of small businesses in the world. So we work as an entrepreneur serving other entrepreneurs. And then my life as a tech entrepreneur starting in the 90s, just because you're friends with people you work with, I've got several hundred friends that happen to be entrepreneurs as well. So when you look at that image, the reality of small business owners, looking at about 6.6 million small business owners according to the U.S. Census, they're not that young upstart tech. The average entrepreneur is in their 40s, and it's actually weighting older and older. A lot of times because the cost of education's gone up so much, entrepreneurs have to choose. Before you take your life savings, you give it a go, but you had like UC Berkeley that you could go to school with for $300 a semester. Now that's $149,000 on average to take someone through a 4-year education. So now when you're betting your savings on your business, you're betting your children's education, which diminishes. So now you have a lot of people becoming entrepreneurs as their kids exit college or enter college, right? Or whenever they've taken the bill for college off the table. So they're in their 40s. They are disproportionately more educated at the undergraduate and graduate degrees. They often, they're actually 200% more likely to be born. If you were born outside of the U.S., you're 200% more likely to start a business. Actually, if you take out Mexican Americans, which is a huge portion of immigrants, it's actually 3 times more likely. They tend to be from middle class and upper class socioeconomic status as well. And it's highly correlated with the family of other small business owners or entrepreneurs. So for those that are entrepreneurs, you are more likely to encourage and have a similar set of values that will encourage that in your children, not only because they want to be like mom or dad, but because they can model some of the values that come out of that. But the demographics are a little less interesting than the psychographics, and that's what I want to talk about. So I have seen so many different people become wildly successful that, like, you'd think, oh, you got to be a Richard Branson, charismatic extrovert, risk taker, jumping out of airplanes or spaceships or whatever you say at the time. But then I look at a Sergey Brin over at Google, or across the board, and you see people introverted, extroverted, totally different styles, totally different personality, and it's not correlated in any which way, I would say. However, personalities is fundamentally different than values. And I think the range of colorful personalities belies a common set of values that I think are highly common to entrepreneurs. The first, I would say, is grit. And I think one of the things, and grit is a little different than hard work. Grit, as I define it, is more about stubbornness, and when you're knocked down, you get back up. Not I'll work harder than anyone else. Entrepreneurs do that too. So hard work is part of it. Grit is in particular about how you handle adversity. So they say, how many times are you going to get back up? An entrepreneur will say, how many times are you going to knock me down? It's one more than you knock me down. Right? I'll always get back up. Now, it's kind of weird because sometimes you'll do that in business and it's failing, and they just keep fighting. And I was like, well, the hard part of being an entrepreneur is if you fail 7 times, people say you're an idiot and stubborn and unrealistic. But then you make $1 billion coming your 8th time and you're a genius. So whether or not, it's all hindsight. But I would say common is, as you start a company, as you start a small business, you're going to have a lot of ups and downs. The vast majority of people's psychographic kind of makeup says when I hit failure, I exit. I reevaluate. Whereas entrepreneurs keep going, keep picking themselves up. So that grit is absolutely critical. The second factor there is kind of independent creative thinking. If you look at the act of entrepreneurship, you're often creating a product or service that doesn't exist. Right? You take a concept. That concept could be, hey, this whole cab thing sucks. I'd like to order something from the phone, be able to pay from it, be able to track when it's coming, right? Have different levels of service, and have everyone here in 3 or 4 minutes. No. Well, a lot of people have that problem and took a cab and was unsatisfactory, and someone said, I'm going to do something about it. I think there's a solution. So a lot of entrepreneurship is problem solving, but in particular, you have a concept. It could be spatial, the metaverse, NFTs, crypto, whatever it may be. You take the idea, and it's your job to make the concept, what you imagine, into reality. All right? So that if you think like everyone else, it's hard to create something different. Now, entrepreneurs kind of hold their own counsel, so they'll ask a lot of opinions, but they have to be confident, because the first thing they'll say is, you're in a 90% fail industry, why would you ever start a business here? Now, an independent thinker will look, that's other people that thought differently than me, that's not me. So that doesn't apply. So there's kind of a blind confidence hubris, but there's also an independence of thought and a comfort in your own counsel. And oftentimes I see entrepreneurs as very creative problem solvers, right? So the third element, which is interesting when I come to career or come to Asia, is comfort with risk and failure. The most difficult thing, I've had a few people that were kind of perfectionists in nature as entrepreneurs, but that's like the 1 in 1,000. If you're a perfectionist, you'll probably hate being an entrepreneur, because our rule is the 80-20, right? When we're starting up in e-commerce in the early years, this is, back in the 90s when I started my incubator, there wasn't any e-commerce online. I mean, I could sit down and have breakfast with Jeff Bezos because he's like, I'm struggling, we're all struggling, we're all trying to figure this thing out. Like, you're the first person with email. He was like, email would be great, but no one else has it. So it kind of sucks. So I was in those times when I started in the internet. And, as I look at that, what do you have to do? It's like, well, if you do e-commerce, you have to do a pick and pack. How do you do a pick and pack? I don't know. Go get a warehouse, figure it out. So I'd send a team to go figure out how to do a pick and pack warehouse. So what's your inventory system? I don't know. Someone's got to have something that we can modify. Go take a look at a catalog company. They've done this problem. Now we'll modify it, integrate it with the front end so we can do real-time inventory. But we start to get into a different place where we're just trying to do enough. You take a generalist that just handles problem after problem after problem. They don't have experience in it in the startup. You get really specialized once you get past 100, 200 people. In the beginning, the first 50 people, everyone's doing everything. You're the CEO, you're the janitor, you take out the trash, sometimes you cook a snack. Like, you're going to do anything and everything. So that 80-20, get it done, prototype, iterate. You say, I'm going to build a perfect product, not launch until it's perfect. Well, then it's like a 10 million build and it's odd. It's highly likely it's going to suck. Versus the person that says, I'm going to get something in front of 20 customers and get their reaction. Then I'm going to iterate. I'm I might do it as a wireframe. I might do it as a prototype, right? But I want the quickest customer feedback, reaction. And so by the time that person trying to perfect it gets their first product launched, I'm on my 10th, 15th iteration. I would say 9 times out of 10, that approach wins. And maybe it's more like 99 out of 100. So that comfort with failure is a different definition of failure. What a lot of my friends would say, oh God, you tried and it failed. I said, no, we tried and we learned. We tried and we gathered data, and we avoided spending tens of millions of dollars to build something when I could prototype it for $100,000. And then I got the feedback to make it better. And we've been iterating like this. So if people said, oh, you didn't get it right, I said, we didn't expect to get it right. We're building something that didn't exist, but now getting closer and closer to something that's going to work. So that comfort with risk and a redefinition of failure into learning experiences is at the heart of being an entrepreneur. If you beat yourself up for every mistake, or as a parent, if I beat my kids up for every mistake, what am I telling them about learning, about risk, about failure? It's not acceptable? How are you going to learn? Okay, just do things you can do perfectly. How are you going to live life that way? You're a kid. You don't do a lot of things. So you need them to try, to experiment, to encourage, to take their own initiative, to fall down, pick themselves up. Right? And I think that is almost the bright line of being an entrepreneur, is that comfort with risk. Now, I'll say something about risk. People think that entrepreneurs take tons of risk, don't care, right? Oh, what the hell, 1 in 100 chance, let's go. 1 in 1,000 chance, let's go. That's not really, we manage risk. We're just comfortable with more risk than other people. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I've got my life savings, I don't want to take naked risk. I want to mitigate risk. I want to have contingencies. But I'm comfortable with the fact that there's a fail rate on this. And I have enough fuel to try as many times as you can, or I'm going to work harder to iterate faster. So I think as you think about risk, it's risk management. And being comfortable with more risk than others, but it doesn't mean naked risk. It doesn't mean sociopathic risk, right? It's a calculated risk and an objective read, and then you plow forward and you iterate, right? And that's the model of an entrepreneur. It's a very different mindset. If you're a perfectionist, the rate of failure, the rate of uncertainty will destroy you. And you won't be able to manage people through the process, and you won't be able to manage expectations unless you're absolutely brilliant and get everything right the first time, every time you do it, and can get 50 people to know exactly what you're doing and get it right perfect. I haven't met anyone like that yet, but I like this highly iterative approach. The other thing, not every entrepreneur, but if you rate people on a competitive scale, I would say entrepreneurs on average would be about 300% more likely to be competitive. Sometimes unhealthy. Now, it's one of those things that it's just an observation. When I was at LegalZoom, we do a personality test. Not a personality, it's like skills-based learning communication. So it's a strength deployment index, so you can get a color. Like red is someone highly competitive, status-oriented, achievement. They want to sell, they want to get the prize, they want to give the speech, then you've got blues that are relationship building. They want to build a team, they want to celebrate with their friends. You have greens that are analytic, right? That like to problem solve. They don't care. The last thing a green wants to get on stage is, I solved the problem, it's good enough for me, right? And then there's hubs that can mix it. So you have 100 points and you're rated on each one of these, and they take a look at how you'll perform when you're comfortable and when you're uncomfortable, and then what are your tendencies. So I noticed that in my VP and C ranks, that red element was maybe 30-35% of my senior staff, and of my junior staff is more like 10%. In fact, I had one of the co-founders of my company and one of our head VPs. They were both pathologically competitive, meaning 1 in 10,000 people, like their scores were off. And they got in an argument about who was more competitive in the middle of the exercise. Because one guy said, oh, well, I'm the most competitive guy here, therefore I will be most successful. I was like, no. Pathologically competitive doesn't mean you're successful. You are successful, but that has nothing to do with it. And then my second guy says, well, that's because I found being super competitive can scare people. So I lied and took me down, but I'm actually more competitive than you. I just have a coping mechanism. And I was like, this is kind of the world, this hyper-competitive group. And I was fortunate, Kobe Bryant's shareholder, and got to spend some time with him, bless him. And, you know, he came to the office, and you think of Michael Jordan, someone like pathologically competitive, Kobe Bryant, very similar. You know, Kobe's just retired. He's wildly relaxed for Kobe. He comes to the office, and he's about to retire at 8 and 24. He comes in, and unlike his normal protocol, he's like putting his arms around people, taking selfies, signing things. He would never sign things before, but he's super happy. And he's just about to win an Oscar or something for his short. And then one of my employees was a huge fan. She's like, hey, I have this little basketball, and it's like a spring. You just hit it, and it launches a little plastic ball into a little thing. She goes, hey, could you sign that? I go, sure. He's like, you want to play one with me? He goes, absolutely not. I go, what? I've never played that. I don't want to lose. And he was like, really serious. He goes, oh, sorry, it's just the way I am. He goes, I would practice 100 times before I would pitch. And he's like, oh, it's like, I know. And it just took him out, and I was like, it never stops for him in anything and everything he does. It can be unhealthy. Honestly, I was unhealthily competitive as a kid. And I see some of that sometimes in some of my children. I have 3 boys. They're 4, year 6, and then 1 in kindergarten. So I see that, and I see when they lose, they cry, right, as kids. And I say, hey, I don't want you to like to lose. It's okay that you hate losing, but you got to learn to deal with it, right? Because you got to use it as motivation to work harder next time. You failed this time. Did you work very hard? Did you train very hard? Did you think your way through? Sometimes it's a game of luck. You're going to lose in a game of dice rolling, right? You have to learn not to like it, but you have to learn to cope with it and use it. You know, Kobe was the best at taking a slight or a loss or an instance, putting a chip, and that's why he would do 1,000 reps when everyone did 50 reps, right? That's why he would train 10, 12 hours a day when other people were training 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day. So sometimes that competitive spirit is what fuels grit, right? It's, I'm going to do the reps, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to work through all the problems, I'm going to work through injuries, I'm going to work through adversity. Now, I mentioned this as a parent because all of these values, grit, appetite for risk, comfort, understanding failure, competitive nature, they can be nurtured by a parenting, or they can impair those values. Right? Like, sometimes I find myself, now it's funny, with my first, everybody have a similar experience, but my first child, if he fell, I'd be there to catch him. Right? I'm watching him at all times. Right? You know, if we had to give him a pacifier, we're boiling that thing and boil the water and, you know, then disinfecting and boil it and rinsing it again. And, you know, by the third child, drops on the floor, like, yeah, I'll put it back. 10 seconds. If he falls, we're like, I think he's okay. He'll get back up. If you're overprotective, I found, or they think that you're always going to be there as a safety net, you're, just from an entrepreneurial mindset, I'm not here to, I don't know, I've never given parenting lessons, but I would say, if you're nurturing an entrepreneur, you gotta let them fall. And there's failures that don't hurt you for the rest of your life, and those are the ones that you learn from. And there's failures that hurt you for the rest of your life that you could, you know, as a parent, you gotta step in, it's a judgment call. But I think this hyper pressure is not good for entrepreneurship. That independent creative thinking is I live or die by my own decisions. And sometimes, if you have a natural born entrepreneur in your children, you'll probably see some of these characteristics psychographic. And you can, if they're really natural born, you can try and impair it because maybe you don't want them to be entrepreneurs. It's a tough life, so it's not for everyone. But if they really have that grit and competitive nature, there's probably nothing you can do to stop it. And it's probably going to lead to a lot of butting of heads. Not always, but potentially. I mean, when I was 14, 15, I thought, I love my parents, we have a good relationship, but I didn't listen to them. At 14, I thought I was totally independent and on my own. I would manage their stocks and portfolios. I would edit their manuscripts because, they were native English speakers. So they relied on me more to do some things. And that kind of gave me a sense of, oh, I'm almost an adult. Not really, but at 14, I was kind of fully grown. So it was kind of at that point. And I had a real problem with authority. My parents, boss. And I think you're going to find that in a lot of entrepreneurs. They want to be their own boss, whether they're qualified or not. At 14, I was not qualified. But we butted heads. And by 15, 16, they kind of just let me do what I needed to do. Right? And they trusted, well, we had you listen to us for a while, and whatever values we've given you, they're now part of you. I can probably just encourage the good things and try and moderate the bad things. But your kind of makeup, personality is already there and set. It was probably set a lot earlier than 14. Right? So we can nurture, we can impair, but a lot of that is letting them figure things out, teaching them to get back up, teaching them persistence. And sometimes you want to make it so easy on your kids. That's not a good recipe for nurturing an entrepreneur. You've got to let them fail. You've got to let them take responsibility for their own actions. I keep thinking like, this is old Gary Larson cartoon of, a penguin amongst millions of penguins that looks at everyone and he's just like, I just got to be me singing. Now, when I grew up, my parents were of the generation, hey, stop singing. Quit putting your head above the crowd, right? That was kind of their mentality. And that's what I mean by nature and nurture, right? You can impair that or you can encourage it. Say, hey, sometimes my son will say, hey, is it problem we do math together? And he says, oh, there's a different way of solving it. Instead of saying, no, this is how I do it, I was like, okay, tell me. What's your idea? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I take the extra time, at least I try to hear out and to play. And then we play sometimes video games together. I said, he's got a creative strategy. And I like to encourage him to solve things in different ways, right? And take the extra time to just think about it differently. And I like to encourage him to solve things in different ways, right? And take the extra time to just think about it differently. Now, functional skills. That's a little bit different, particularly at kind of kindergarten through 12th grade, but what I would say is, as an entrepreneur, all entrepreneurs must lead, right? So that's kind of the de facto part of the deal. You have to take vision in your head. You have to make it reality. More importantly, you have to recruit and manage a diverse set of talents. It's not the ideation. If you think I have to weigh a good idea versus good execution, most entrepreneurs would go 99% execution, 1% idea. And why would we do that? Well, in our iterative approach to learning, we would say, if we're going to weight the idea, Amazon, what was the real big idea? I want the biggest store on earth. There's a million people that want to be the biggest e-commerce. I want to beat Walmart e-commerce. Now, there's a lot more to it in Amazon Web Services, and there's a lot of other stuff that went on. But in essence, the idea ain't all that unique or original. Where there's an Uber, there's a Lyft, and there's a bunch of other things, right? Anything's going to get copied. So when we iterate, it's all in the execution. That's why we say 99% execution. There's a bunch of people that keep spitting up ideas but don't have the guts to leave their job and go after it. I have a wonderful close friend of mine that wants to be an entrepreneur. And he's come to me 7, 8 times since we graduated college. I have an idea. I think this is the one. And then he goes, oh, can you give me some feedback? I said, sure. Now, every 3 or 4 years he does this. And now I'm like, buddy. At about 47, I said, can we just grab a drink? He goes, why? I said, how many times have we done this? You are never going to pull the trigger. If you didn't pull the trigger on the first 6 ideas, and you keep thinking about it, you don't want it. You don't want to be an entrepreneur. You like the idea of it, but you don't want it. And I don't think you're ever going to take the leap, which is totally fine. But then I'd rather we just hang out and drink and eat instead of like actually doing research. Because the first few times I did a lot of like research and I talked to folks and I got feedback. And then later I was like, you like the idea, but it's the execution. Right? So functional skills, though, on recruiting a diverse set of talents. When you're an entrepreneur, you want the best talent around you. And usually when that best talent is around you, especially in our space of tech, you are dealing with a highly international, ethnically diverse crowd. The most talented person, male, female, purple, Martian, doesn't matter as long as they can do the job. And, I went to Austin and we were getting these incentives. And board came back and said, hey, I don't know if this will cause a problem, but we have a diversity issue. And I was thinking, oh man, conservative Republicans, what are you saying? Because, obviously being an Asian American, and I was like, oh, we have a minimum diversity requirement. Oh, you mean on the good side? You're worried that we're not diverse looking at me? And he goes, come to LA. He looks in LA, he's like, oh, you're like 70% minority. I was like, LA is 60, 70% minority. Tech's even more. Now, it's not as well represented in certain ethnicities than others. But, if you look at engineering, the chance, I would say my engineering team across 7, 8 companies is probably 75% born outside the country or immigrants, second generation. Right? So if you can't manage and recruit in tech or in life, we don't do anything on our own. This silly myth of one person can conquer the world, it's this entrepreneur. No. Are you forgetting the other 25,000 people at Apple or 100,000 people at the time? Or so there's this cult that comes around the myth of a leader and not around a team. But to be really good, you must inspire a team, manage a team, recruit them, incentivize them, and be comfortable with people from wildly different backgrounds. Actually, just the fact that your kids are at Dulwich is a huge benefit. To be international, to be with children from different backgrounds, to have friends from different backgrounds, I think is a precursor to being able to talk and communicate effectively in life. Because this world is only going more global. Not to get into politics, but look what's happening with Russia right now. Right? Their economy, like all of our economies, are wildly intertwined. It's very different than 50 years ago. Right? A lot of tech's done in the US. We're a tech hub. We're not very good at tech manufacturing. None of that's done really domestically, very little of it. So we rely on other countries and other pieces of the world for fundamental pieces of our life. And if you can't work in that global economy, really, every country's got to have their own car? I mean, when you think of cars, I can name 5 countries By the 6th, 7th, 8th, you'll be very hard pressed to name a single brand. There's 200 countries out there. So if someone decides to cut you off from car manufacturing, you're gonna be in trouble. So this global world, every decade the world gets smaller. And if your children succeed not in tech but in anything, it's really about communicating effectively and understanding people from different cultures. Because otherwise, you really can't get much done. Now, I think in part of that communication, inspiration, every entrepreneur is a salesman. Even the most introverted has got to sell. You got to sell. You think, why would I be a salesman? I'm an entrepreneur. Like, how are you going to raise capital? You're selling. You're selling your team. You're selling capabilities. So, public speaking, debating, any kind of public speaking, any exercise in leadership, volunteer, being active in their communities, engaging with people. The more they're doing that, the more they're interacting in groups to get something done, the better the training goes. I thought I just picked Obama because I think Trump gave crappy speeches and it ain't Biden's. But a great orator is very helpful. You can raise a lot of capital that way. Now I want to share one piece of advice I got. It was the worst advice I've ever received, but it sounded really good at the time. And I'll leave it to an anonymous family friend, Dr. Park. There's so many doctors. It's okay. And he said, never do business with your friends. And I was, kid growing up, I said, what's wrong with doing business with your friends? He said, well, business is tough. We go through highs and lows. And you want to really put your friendship on the line. Right? It's better never to do business with your friends. And then, business is one world and your friends are a different world. Very compartmentalized thinking. And I thought, oh yeah, well, God, if you're really close friends and you really value friendship, why would you risk it? Once I became an entrepreneur, I realized that was the worst advice I've ever heard. If I'm going to do the thing that's most important in my life, then I realized, and maybe you don't have a high quality group of friends. So that could be part of it. But generally speaking, if I'm doing something where I'm taking enormous risk, and it's really important to me, and I need the most talented group of people that I trust, that we move faster because there's the substance of the conversation, right? And then there's the relationship. Well, when you have a relationship, you can speak in fewer words, and they understand what you mean, you understand what they mean. And you don't think it's personally. Courtesy is not for family. Courtesy is for strangers, right? Courtesy is nice, but it can take a long time and it beats around the bush. Nothing against the British, but but I'd say when you're family, you say, that's messed up. He's like, why'd you do it? Because you're wrong. Now you have a debate. Now I don't say I don't love you because you disagree with me. I expect that from family. So the brutal honesty that friends can have with each other, because you've been through all of life's embarrassing moments, you had your first zit together, you had your first failed love, you know all this weird crap about each other, but you have a love and a camaraderie and you trust each other. So when you have talented people that you trust and you cut them out from the thing most important in your life and try and bring those worlds separate, it's foolish. A lot of my close friends came from working together or were friends before. And I spent my life collecting talent, not thinking about it. I just thought I was drinking and having fun with my friends. But at the end of the day, when I thought about college, high school, my first job, I only had one job. But for most of my life, I'm collecting talent. I have different people that I go, oh, this person's really good at this person's really good at this. And then when a company arises and I need that skill set, I'm going to turn to the people that I know. Why would I turn to a recruiter for a 3-hour interview when anyone can fake that crap? You never really know until you're working side by side or in the trenches. People say, well, when Adversity hits you. What do? I fight. Some people run. But everyone says they fight. But some people run. Some people quit. And I know my friend who's going to be able to be there by my side. So I actually think now, in nurturing entrepreneurship and your kids, etc., it's the closer the bonds they have with each other. And putting them in places where there's a lot of high-quality folks. And schools, I mean, I have to say that to Koreans, right, are centers for that bring people together. And I think that is really important because my life as an entrepreneur would be fundamentally different and wildly less successful had I not worked with some of my closest friends. And even now, some of my closest friends are people that I met from work because we've been through the fire together. Now I'm going to share something because this is an international school and it's actually germane to entrepreneurship. I have a lot of data on entrepreneurs. Having formed 2 million small businesses and looking through the government and looking through some proprietary data. But as I mentioned, in the US, immigrants are more than twice as likely to be born. If you're twice as likely to be an entrepreneur than someone native born in the US. 3 times more from most ethnicities. Now, some of that is a power of who an immigrant is, the people that left the country, and some of it has to do with which country it actually is, right? Because the people that leave a country aren't exactly like everyone that stayed in the country. That's a self-selection bias, right? So there's some bias in that. But if you look at the 10 most valuable brands, 7 of the 10 were launched by immigrants or children of immigrants. If you look at, my world of tech, it's crazy. I'll give you the stats in a second, though I wish we had more female pictures in tech. It's about 60-40 male-female for entrepreneurship. But in tech, CEOs, it's probably like 80-90% male. Something I hope to change as so young. But here's some interesting stats. About a little more than 13% of Americans are immigrants. 29.5% of entrepreneurs are foreign born. Silicon Valley startups, not just successful, but everyone that got funded, etc., 52% immigrants for over that 10-year period, because we had to go retroactive. 45% of the high-tech Fortune 500 were either an immigrant, child, or immigrant. And then that doesn't even show the children of immigrants is 23% of children of immigrants. So, if you actually looked at the combined revenue of just those companies started by immigrants in the US, they would be the 3rd largest country GDP, right? After China and Japan. Now, just for fun fact, I already said it in the kind of overview, that Koreans were the 2nd most entrepreneurial ethnicity. So we looked at 100 countries' immigration patterns, and looked at what percent of working adults own their own small business. Right? Curious, guys, who would you guess would be in that top 10? Remember, by that definition, percent of working adults that own their own small business. Any guesses? China?
India?
Good guess. India, good guess. Remember, it's percent, though. So there's a weird thing that goes on in this. If you hire everyone in your own ethnicity, and you have 100 employees, you just really hurt the numbers. Right? So it's not by the number, it's the percentage, right, of entrepreneurs. And Indians have a ton of tech, right? Agreed. But they're not so top 10. It's like a We Are the World picture here between Asia, the Middle East, South America, right? So 10 is, if you look at Asia, it's only Vietnamese and Korean, right? 5%. And if you go to Southeast, East, Middle East, you can maybe, my Persian friends always tell me, we're East too. I was like, okay, you're just middle. But, I have a lot of Persian friends that are entrepreneurs, inventors, and such. They edged us Koreans by 20 basis points. Like, we're like 20, I forgot the number, but it was like 24.2 versus 24.4. But Europe, you've got Italy, Germany, Poland. In the Hispanic world, Latinos, we've got Cuba, Colombia, Brazil. How Canada got there kind of surprised me. But if I look at this, and I look at like 1 and 2, to get back to that psychographic of what it is as an entrepreneur, and why out of 100 countries, Koreans happen to be number 2, which means the likelihood of your children, 1, going to an international school, potentially spending time abroad, or your children hear from another country that are in Korea. You have an outsider's perspective. And that is essential to problem solving and is a huge benefit to entrepreneurs. There's a very famous investor named Mike Moritz. He founded Sequoia. Sequoia is one of the storied firms in the Valley. Now, when I was raising money at LegalZoom, he wrote an offer to invest in us. And I like to meet him. He's one of the legends in the industry. And he goes, I said, tell me about yourself. How do you pick entrepreneurs? And he goes, I just pick immigrants and children of immigrants. That's it. And I go, what do you mean? If you're born in this country and you're not an immigrant, you wouldn't invest in them? He goes, nope. I go, are you saying that because, I'm Korean American? He goes, nope. That's actually my thesis. It's a fundamental part of my thesis. It's not that I wouldn't, but I'm disproportionately. And I thought, is this a sales pitch? And then I looked at his partners at Sequoia, and they're dominantly, almost not quite, I think there was one person on the senior staff that was kind of just born in America, and I couldn't tell. But they were from all over the world. And I thought, tell me a little bit more about this thesis. Because I didn't know these numbers back then. This is early on in my career. He said, first, for appetite for risk, these are the people that left their countries. To go to a country which was not their native language was very difficult. And they're starting a business. Right? They're going to work so much harder than anybody else because they work so hard just to get here. I mean, if you think about how the Cubans actually got into the U.S., their appetite for risk on a flotation device with their family going hundreds of miles in the sea, right? That's real risk. There's a disproportionate amount in this group of people that have known war. And I think that gives you a different perspective on life as well, and on risk. You look at what happened with Boris Johnson. Everyone's like, oh, Partygate. Right? Oh, I think we're going to get him to resign because he threw parties during COVID. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm saying that was the dominant narrative on Boris Johnson up to the Ukraine, but he speaks Russian. And now, people are saying, well, that looks pretty paltry on the scheme of things. Now we're looking at what happened in Russia and Ukraine, and they're uniting behind it. There's a sense of perspective that also helps on risk. My friends would ask me, why did you had this nice strategy consulting job, it pays well, it's very prestigious, blah, blah. Why did you just give it up and not pay yourself and try and start something? And I was like, I think you're thinking about risk a little bit differently. I can always get a job. I went to a decent college, I have some decent experience. My parents are comfortable, I don't have to support them. They can support me actually. So if I fail, maybe I'll go back home, it's a nice house. I'll save some more money, I'll try again. But I have a safety net. I'm not taking any risk. I don't have kids. I don't have debts. I'm so lucky. I graduated college without debt. So I can go and take this kind of risk. It's not really risk at 23. I have nothing to lose. I have everything to gain and nothing to lose. If you're thinking about reputation or prestige, you're talking the wrong language for entrepreneurship. Build. Right? We do it ourselves. So I think this is interesting because I don't know if many of you had a lot of experience with Persians, but Persians and Koreans have a very similar psychographic makeup. And I put it this way. One, we know what war is, right? And we have a perspective that's very recent, that puts risk in perspective. But two, like I talk to a lot of my friends that are Korean or Persian and say, what would it be like to work in your family company? And like, no. I don't, they say, well, they go in the US, I don't want to work for the man, whoever the man is, right? And I was like, okay. I said, what do you want to do? I said, I'm your own boss. What about your family? I don't want to work for my dad, I don't want to work for my uncle, I'm my own boss. They kind of have a chip on their shoulder. Koreans are very much like that. That's why like these churches, like they just keep schisming because everyone wants their own church, right? It's so hard like to get people to collaborate. But in a way, that's what promotes entrepreneurship. And that's where I see this kinship. It's also very highly educated. Birds are very similar. The first wave of Koreans in the U.S. were disproportionately educated. It came after the Lyndon Johnson Act of 1965, which said that if you had an advanced degree, we're doing away with race-based quotas. And now, if you had an advanced degree, we're going to disproportionately give you visas to come to America. That's how my parents came about. Opened in 65, I came in 67. My sister was born in 69, 70. So I was that first children, that first wave of children born in the U.S. that were Korean American. So,
John, can I ask you a quick
sure.
I'm just curious where the Balkan countries, wherever the Balkan countries appearing anywhere so near close to that top 10, whether it's Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, do you remember?
Yes. Eastern Europe was pretty high on the list. There's a, especially where there's, I would say it's correlation of highly educated, and also when they immigrated to the U.S. But I don't remember the exact. But what shocked me about this kind of makeup was one, how diverse it was. And two, this thing that I always thought was kind of hurting Koreans in the world, which is the fact that sometimes we don't collaborate well with each other. Right? My dad had this saying, it's like, Japanese are like sand, right? Look at each individual, but they're like mud. When you pick them up, they stay together. Koreans are like the individual grains of sand with no water. Individually, they're tough, but it's when you grab it, it all comes through your fingers. Because we don't collaborate as well with each other. And I said, well, that can make it very difficult. Actually, though, like anything, that psychological makeup, that chip on your shoulder, a lot of people are successful because of that chip. It's a source of motivation. It's that Kobe Bryant chip. And I think Koreans have it. I think Persians have it. It's not common to all of those countries, but it's part of it. But now if you step back and think psychographics of a nation and going back, to me, demographics is one thing. Psychographics is more interesting. Right? Do I see this in my children? Can I encourage it? Grit. Koreans, you look at Korean, Irish, Mexican boxers, what are they known for? They're always moving forward and they get back up after you knock them down. We're a country that just gets back up, and we've been knocked down a lot. Independent creative thinking, it's actually fascinating to me because the first wave of a lot of business in Korea was iterative copycat. But I didn't think that was actually natural to Koreans. It was a straight path. It's relatively efficient when you're starting, when you're building, right, an economy. But when you look at, Koreans are kind of an interesting right brain, left brain. And the rest of the world's now saying, kind of, whether it's it's our art, our movies, our music, right now, that are really outperforming the weight class, if you look by percentage of population. That kind of independent, creative thinking, right brain, left brain, is, I think, really interesting in Korea as a psychological makeup. Comfort with risk failure. Part of it is being a country that, 50 years ago was in a totally different state. They're highly competitive. It's like this is a nation where a lot of the core values, some of them can be seen as weaknesses, some of them can be seen as strengths, but from the perspective of entrepreneurship, having your children here in this environment, whether you're, of Korean descent or not, this is kind of a hotbed for entrepreneurship. And it doesn't surprise me that, like, especially in tech, Korea has really come far. I think it's like the third best cryptocurrency and NFTs, and, right? It's moving fast. And it's now actually in certain areas far ahead of the US or Europe because of the infrastructure here, right? And, if you want to do anything in mobile, you look to Korea first, right? Like most of the US mobile execs come to Korea to figure out what the model will be in the US in 5 or 10 years because it's already here. They've been dealing with, our definition of high speed in the US, Korea kind of laughs at, and payment mechanisms, like we already do that. This whole domestic transfer, we don't have that in the US. It's really efficient. We don't have it. Don't know why. So, I think just as a parent, I know that I'm not saying that entrepreneurship is good or bad, but it's percentage-wise highly likely your children being here outside of the country, right? Or being here and moving later outside the country, you're going to have a disproportionate number of entrepreneurs, statistically speaking. And those are the characteristics that I just want to, my perspective to be on the lookout and how do you nurture it. It'll be interesting. So with that, I'm just going to open up for Q&A.
Thank you, John. I enjoyed your presentation a lot. One quick question is, from your background, you seem to be more for a professional career, like going to MBA. Back then, I believe a lot of students went to MBA with those who are investment banking or consulting.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to become an entrepreneur from the beginning, or how did your career?
No, I wanted to be an NBA. I wanted to be a Laker. First, I wanted to be a professional tennis player, and then I wanted to be an NBA. Both require talent I didn't have. Then I thought it would be really cool to be an actor. But then I thought, I'm comfortable with risk, but that's a long haul. I wasn't like, do I make this a hobby? It was passion. Just say follow your passions. I like acting, like theater, drama. I said, oh, should I do that? And my friends were like, what the hell? Give me this education if you're going to go do that. And I go, well, it might be fun. But at about 11, I was iterating through this kind of in my head, and I realized I had to write something about what you're going to be when you grow up. I said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And most people that knew me growing up, being an entrepreneur is exactly what they expected, because that's kind of what I said I would do before I even entered high school, right? As a, I think I was, 6th grade or something. And when I went to business school, so I self-designed my majors in undergrad. And what happened with that is I could take classes at the graduate school as an undergrad. So I could get like a sampling in graduate school. The one place they wouldn't let me do that was Harvard Business School. I could take a class at Harvard Law School, but I couldn't take it at business school. It's closed to anyone outside of business school. They won't even let the other graduate students in. I said, that's messed up. I gotta figure out a way through that. So I ended up being the course assistant to first-year marketing, so I could take the classes as a course assistant. And one of the professors that was there was Jeffrey Rayford. And I say this because when I went a couple years later, I actually attended. Jeffrey Rayford I got him in his first year of teaching. And then by the time I went back to business school, he was the professor of kind of the internet. He says, John, you said you're going to be an entrepreneur when you were an undergrad. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to have to start my own internet company. And he goes, really? Because did you know like 80-90% of applications to HBS say they're going to be an entrepreneur and start their own business, and only about 15% actually do it? out of business school because they look at the debt and they take a high-paying job. And it's the IT risk, and then sometimes they never do it. So everyone says it, very few people do it. And I go, Jeff, if I interview for a job, you can chop off my hands. I'm not, this is like, I'm pot committed. He goes, good. Then every entrepreneur from the internet that comes to campus, I'll have them sit down with you for lunch or dinner or breakfast. And every time there's a guest speaker from, in the tech industry, he would arrange some time for me to speak with him. And I got to see a lot of people very active at the time. And Jeff Bezos came by, and that's an interesting but longer story. But, I think for me, I almost dropped out of business school because I wanted to start my company. But then my professor said, dude, it's not that, your first year is a little harder, it's like intense, but your second year is just electives. So just do all your electives around your business and have all the professors help you out and make all your projects around the business. This is not like a real academic, it's business school. So who cares? Take the classes, launch your business. It shouldn't slow you down at all. So that's the only reason I graduated. I really thought about dropping out in the second year. So I think, it's a professional school, and it tends to produce fewer entrepreneurs than Stanford or Babson, because the enemy of great is good in life, I think, which is the hardest thing to do. And I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine that he got a job. So they're at a business school. He got a job to come back to his former company, like a very prestigious consulting company. And they said, if you come back, we will pay for your business school in 2 years. You give us 2 years of service, and I will cover the $100,000 free. Boom.
All paid back.
You'll be
From the top 1% salary earners.
and so we'll give you a ton of money and all your debt. And in 24 months, you're done. You can do it.
Just come back. So he
Was interviewing for a startup job because he wanted to be in the startup industry. And it was a really cool company with about 23 employees, 24 employees, something like that. And got a job offer from him. And he said, you know what, I'm going to go back to my old firm. And his roommate couldn't get any job offers. And he said, hey, when he said, no, I said, dude, my roommate would be perfect for this. But his roommate didn't have as many options because he came from a little more of a non-traditional background. So his roommate took the job, ended up being Netscape. Ended up being a 50, 100 million, whatever dollar decision. Because he ended up being one of the first employees of one of the first billion-dollar unicorns. The enemy of that risk was having such a good alternative. Just 2 years. I know, I kept in touch with him for maybe 15 years afterwards. He never started a company after that. I bet you he did eventually. But sometimes when you have this really good, safe option, this highly risky, incredible option doesn't look so good. So, that's what I saw at business school. A lot of people that could be super talented entrepreneurs, it was so easy to take this really good option. They didn't go here.
Thank you. Maybe another follow-up question. Like, where did you get the idea of starting LegalZoom? Was it from your experience, or?
I actually didn't. LegalZoom is one of the only companies that I've been CEO of that I didn't start. I took it over when it was about 40-ish people. And I was on the board of advisors when it started out in an apartment, because it was like a family friend. One of my brother's really close friends was one of the 4 co-founders there. And I was on the board helping them. And then I was I had sold one of my companies, and I was taking like a couple years off, and I was golfing maybe like 200-300 rounds a year. And it was my first kind of touch of retirement. And then my only condition of helping out or mentoring or sitting with investors is I'm never going to go into an office. So meet me at a bar, a restaurant, a pool, on a golf course, whatever, but I'm just not going to go into an office. And somehow they were doing some really interesting stuff, and they were getting into some trouble, and everything was breaking because it was growing, which is a really good thing. And somehow they got me into the office, and somehow they kind of tricked me, and then I became CEO just to help them out through this phase. And then 16 years later, I was still like CEO. And so it was kind of happenstance. But the idea for LegalZoom is 3 lawyers and a techie. And the first idea of LegalZoom that didn't launch was like a telephone service for lawyers at $1 per minute. And then that didn't work. So they iterated, tried to get through platform economics, and they came on this automated solution of documents with a high degree of skilled personnel. And that combination of platform, people, and technology to reform a very labor-intensive business, right? So to try and take the best legal documents and then customize them for folks. But you only pay upfront a lot for that initial legal document, but you don't pay over and over again for the repetition of it. So it was an iterative process to get to LegalZoom, just as it was with most concepts. If you look at the original plan with the name on it and what actually launched, that iterative process takes you in a very different direction.
Hi, John. This might be a bit of a tired question, and certainly given your current position in university and where we are in the school, it might be pertinent. Can you teach entrepreneurship?
Yes, but I think it's like, can you teach NBA basketball skills? Yeah, you can teach it. You can coach. Like Phil Hank is an amazing coach. He takes people and you can, but it's a combination of nature and nurture, like most things are in life. There's a set of folks that will be amazing in different parts. They may be amazing artists, but they'll never be amazing entrepreneurs. They'll be amazing athletes, but they won't be amazing entrepreneurs. Some people can do both. I think there is that core psychographic skill set that if you don't have all or a good, healthy dose of most of those psychographics, it's difficult. There's a certain psychographic that is the opposite of being an entrepreneur. I hate risk. I love perfection. Then being an entrepreneur will make you miserable. So, yes, I can teach you skills, but that's like teaching you about something that you're going to hate and be miserable, and what's the point? So, I think when you have a child that has these entrepreneurial tendencies or aspirations, to me, it's the psychographic. How do you teach them to work in groups? How do you give them experiences, hands-on experience leading, communicating? And I think how you treat their failures is probably the most important thing in terms of nurturing. The skills, public speaking, I'm an advisor to these guys called Own the Room, now they're called Bluescape, but they're amazing at teaching public speaking, right? They get all that actors and celebrities before they go on the Tonight Show, like, they're really nervous because I've never
I have a script. I'm used to performing.
for a camera. If they're just asking me questions, I'm reacting. I've never done that. So you think they'd be totally comfortable, but people that are in front of billions of people on screen are actually never in front of an audience because they didn't do stage show. And so they would train them on. So there's all these skills can be taught, but the value system is different. Skills and psychographic are separate buckets. And I think you start with the psychographic, nurturing those values, and then move from there. The skills-based learning, you can go to trade school for that, you can go to seminars for that, you can learn on the job. But the psychographic, I think, is the most important part.
Hi, could you maybe talk about, since you talked a lot about comfort with risk and failures, maybe a failure that you felt was a monumental failure and what you learned from that failure?
So maybe this will be a weird insight to the mind of an entrepreneur, but I don't think of life as great failures. I just think of them as great learning experiences. So I've had companies that didn't work, that we closed and shuttered. And you'd say, oh, that was a big failure. The company didn't work. Well, not all companies work. So, but if 4 out of 7 work, that's pretty good. Right? That's a pretty good hit rate. The one experience, I remember my incubator. So I had this incubator, and my investor invested a few $1 million in the angel around the incubator. And I would partner with companies, large companies, to launch their internet division. So we launched jcrew.com in New York. And then Lee and Fung, a big Hong Kong company, they were my investor, and they wanted us to launch a JV. And in launching the JV, we raised about $250 million when I was 29 to do this joint venture. And he said, no more incubator, no more 1 year student interim team. You got to run this and make it $1 billion and go after it and leave your old incubator. And you have to appoint a new CEO. I was like, well, all your money there is that's not good because I closed all the deals. And he goes, no, we're going to let go of it. We don't care. We're the ones losing money. I don't want you to do that anymore. I want you to do this. And my incubator was my first ever company after 2000 crashed. Disbanded. Now I moved a lot of folks back into my joint venture, but it was devastating for me to think my first company now is no longer. It was an amazing collection of talent. Some of those consistently high talent, and was small, so it could just be amazingly talented people and good friends, and you had to unwind it. And so if I look at that as a failure, you can't, but I don't. Because one, they're so talented. They all got amazing jobs. Some became entrepreneurs, some got amazing jobs. And fast. These are people that can get jobs anywhere because they're just that good. And it killed me to let go of people that I love. Like they're really close friends. I recruited them away from the prestigious. And I remember I was all torn up and I was sitting there, I was talking to a really close friend. I was like, we got to unwind this thing now. And he looked at me and goes, John, we should have unwound this thing 6 months ago. Don't worry. I've been waiting for this. You're all stressed out. Chill. I got you. I totally understand this. I'm prepared. I had a good time. But our time's done. And so I was like, oh man. I was like, all emotionally and then I realized we're adults. And the nice thing about working with really talented people like that, they're going to always land on their feet. There's nothing you can do to stop them from being successful. They're going to be successful. They're smart, they're hardworking, they're good people, they're high integrity. So I say, was that a failure or was that a learning? For me, it was learning. And people say, which mistake would you take back? I say none of them. I'm like into alternate timelines, like multiverse, Marvel, comic book stuff. So if you ever change something in your past, you will not be the same person today. What do you learn more from? Success or failure? You touch the hot stove, you surely will not touch that again once you've been burned. So I think failure sometimes is a better learning experience than success. If you take that away, you're not the same person. And I kind of like that. I like my kids, I like my life. I don't want to change it, so I don't want to change anything in the past. That's just who I am. With all the warts and all the ugliness and all the good times, that's just the package. And you take it as a whole.
Thank you very much. I just have a very quick question. If my children start to be an entrepreneur, what would that mean for me as a parent? What am I expecting to get into?
There's a decent chance after the first failure they're going to want to live at home. I think my experience with my parents was, first they said, don't do it. I said, why would you do that? They actually wanted me to be a medical researcher, a professor. My mom's whole family, they're doctors, they're parents. So that's what, they didn't like this entrepreneurship. Because they're Koreans, but My parents left in the 60s. So their version of Korea is stuck in the 40s, 50s, 60s. In their mind, business is bad. Academics are up here. It's kind of Confucian. Academics are here, politicians down here, and businessmen are right there. Taking advantage of people, not treating them right, taking the country's resources, corruption. So they're like, you're going to be one of them? What a waste. So it wasn't a very friendly conversation with my parents. But it wasn't unfriendly either. Because it was also said, hey, I don't know what it's like in Korea, because I live in the US. But here, we create communities with the jobs. We create opportunities. Like, it's a cool thing. We create products that didn't exist. It's really fun. So they didn't try to dissuade me, because by the time I'm doing this in my 20s, they realize I don't listen anyways. So they might give me advice, but they did a half-hearted attempt, like, are you sure? But I think part of that is, as a parent, we all have our own dreams and wishes for our children. And sometimes I feel that might be the things that we wanted to do that we didn't do. Like my dad wanted to be a researcher, and he ended up being a doctor instead of a researcher, and he regretted it. And he keeps doing medical research even when he's retired for 20 years. He's been writing this 2,000-page anthology on medical research that he just does for fun. And I was like, dude, that's your dream. That's not my dream. And I think that's the hardest thing as a parent to say. I have a friend that gave me some really interesting parenting advice before my first children. He said, my job as a parent is to help them find whatever it is that makes them happy and passionate and feel good about life. But I'm here to facilitate them finding it. So once they find it, it'll be like a fish to water. They'll start swimming away. They'll do whatever they need to do. My job is to let them experience a wide range of things, and then whatever it hits, I'm there to help support them. But I'm not even a guide. I'm just trying to give them opportunities, and then they'll find their own way. And then whatever advice I can. It was a very passive, supportive. The Korean way I was brought up was not as passive. And it was supportive, but with a dictatorial kind of attempt. And my parents were actually really cool about it. They kind of let me do my own thing. So we fought a lot when we were 14, and by the time I was 20, they're like, yeah, you can do whatever you want anyways. You grew up here, you figured it out, you'll figure it out. So they were, became very supportive, I think, later. But I think if you're going to have a child that's going to be an entrepreneur, they're going to take risks that you might not be comfortable with. They might choose a career path you may not like. And that's good, whether they're an entrepreneur or not. That increased risk is something that every parent deals with differently with their children. And I can't really give advice on that because it depends on everyone's situation and, family finances and the whatever idea. But they might ask for money. I have a rule, and with the kids. If my kids ask me to raise funds, I might match it, but you're going to go sell. You're going to go raise money, and I might match it, but you're not going to get it from me alone. You're going to go out there and do what every entrepreneur does, which is pitch your concept, recruit a team, and try and raise some money. I, as your dad, can help introduce you to folks, but you're going to do the work. If I do the work for you, I've robbed you of that learning, and I probably am going to doom your success. Because I don't want you to follow my footsteps. I want you to find your own thing. If you want to be an entrepreneur, cool. But just don't default to what your dad does. Do what you want to do. So it's hard, but the biggest thing I see is the risk. And just being comfortable with it and saying, find your own way. They might have a different risk profile and you just got to live with it. There's not much you can do with kids anyways. Right? By the time they're in college, there's nothing you can really do. I kind of feel like our major impact is kind of 0 to 10. And after that, I see how fully formed my 11-year-old's personality is. And I kind of feel like, wow, he'll change as he gets older, but 80% of it's there. Right?
now that, you know, you've done serial entrepreneurship, I know you're still very much involved with a lot of companies, but what motivates and inspires you? What's next for you?
It's weird now as an entrepreneur because I don't want to be CEO anymore. I actually value freedom more than work. So to see my
I want to see the golf when I want to golf, travel.
when I want to travel, like I like the freedom, but I still like creating companies. So I've gone into this weird mode where I'm building companies, funding them, owning them, but I won't start it until I find a CEO, usually a previous exec of mine. Maybe a VP that never got their shot but wanted to. Maybe a director, maybe a friend, whatever. But a lot of now my companies are run by former colleagues of mine. So now I want to create a product that's really special. It's more pride of ownership. And so I think of it like I'm doing it's kind of great. I'm doing a chicken sandwich concept. So I like In-N-Out. When I was in high school, I wrote because I wanted to do an In-N-Out franchise. So we don't franchise. And you're 16. But I was like, oh man, this thing would really, and they sent me like a t-shirt to be nice. So I had this concept to be like an In-N-Out of chicken sandwiches. Like, could you make the best chicken sandwich in the world? So I've got these 3-star Michelin chefs concocting all these weird formulas to make the best. We have fries that stay crisp an hour later. It's very difficult for delivery. We have ice cream that doesn't melt for 45 minutes. And we have this amazing chicken sandwich. And we're launching it. And I was like, oh, you know what would be really cool is to create, like I like, as an exercise right now, I'm going to the highest fill rate industries and seeing if the skill of entrepreneurship can overcome the crappiness of this industry, of which restaurants, I've lost so much money in restaurants over the years. I had one thing that returned capital in a year and 7 that failed, mostly negative 100%. So I said, okay, let me see if I can create a large, meaningful company in this crappy industry because I have some skills as an entrepreneurship, let me try it here. And then if that works, I'm gonna go try and make money in movies because I've never met anybody that made money in movies. And I was like, just as an exercise, but I do it for passion. So right now, what I wanna do is create a business model for restaurants where all the profits are shared with the front line. Because there's some silly, stupid things. If I have someone that worked in my restaurant business for 7 years, they're getting paid minimum wage plus tips. Someone came in yesterday to get paid minimum wage plus tips. But this person knows all of they're paid exactly the same. I'm like, this doesn't make sense, but that's the whole industry. So I'm trying to create like a profit share that lifts everyone within the company. Like I like In-N-Out because if you manage In-N-Out, one of these little crazy little box things, you could make $400,000 or $500,000 a year. Like the owners share the profits all the way down and create good health care, a good living, a good career path. So to me, it's an exercise in how to create an enlightened business with an awesome product that I'd love to eat. And so now it's much more about, that's one side, and I do a lot of pharmaceuticals. So I'm I'm a board director on 2, an investor in 2 pharmaceutical companies that have some drugs that might change the world. And to me, just biotech is a lot like tech, so it's kind of interesting. So, but a lot of my entrepreneurial activities now are based on a different model of business with an awesome product. Whereas I think in the early days, I wanted just a successful business. And now I really want to create something special. Right? And we've created something special in the past, but this is just, like that's the ante. And if it's not, there's no point. Okay, that's my time. Thank you.
John, thank you so much for this presentation and taking the time to spend with us here this morning and sharing your insights. As an educator, so much of what you presented here resonates with me in terms of how we educate our children about developing skills of critical thinking, creative thinking, in terms of resilience and grit. And of course, all these things very difficult and challenging to do. Of course, that's why we do them. So thank you again. Give John another round of applause. Thank you so much.